Hey, church, I hope you're doing well. So, if you were able to be with us last week, you know that we started this conversation about choices. And how do we choose? Do we choose to zig or to zag? And I didn't really give us a clear answer other than to say we make choices based on faith, that our faith in God should be the foundation of our choice. And in part, we do that because we don't know all of the outcomes of our choice, the ripple effects of our choices. We don't know all of the things that will happen because of a particular time, in a particular place, and a decision that we make under those circumstances. Today, we're going to look at another aspect of choice, and that is, asking this question. Well, what happens when difficulties arise because of the choice that you made? Does that mean that you chose poorly, that you should turn around and make another decision? Or does that mean that you chose well? Just as a spoiler alert, I'm going to again come to the conclusion that we can't always know. And in part, that's because of our nature. We're significantly insignificant by design. This is true in our ability to see all of the ramifications of our choice. It's true also in our ability to read and tell the results. When hardships come, we don't always know where to put them and what category to put them in. We're significantly insignificant even in our ability to discern. But before we get all the way down there, let me tell you just a little bit more of the story that I shared a bit of last time. If you didn't see it, it's fine. You'll catch up. It's not, hypercritical for this message. Anyway, you might know that I grew up in Ohio. At the end of college, or at the end of high school, I made a decision to go to college in Pennsylvania, in part because of what I thought the future held and how I might get to that future spot. It seemed like that was a good decision at the time. And then at the end of college, I made a choice to move to Latrobe, to take a position as a counselor, to work with delinquent kids in Latrobe in a group home setting, and to make that the next step of my journey. I made a choice of faith based on the amount of faith that I had at that time, but I made a choice of faith and moved to Latrobe to begin this new life as an adult. Well, when I got to Latrobe, things didn't really go smoothly. At least not, in my opinion. They weren't awful. It's not like end of the world kind of things. Oh, I can't believe all this stuff happened to me. But things didn't go how I had hoped they would go. I felt isolated and alone a bit. I moved to a new city, a new place. I didn't have anybody around, no family, no friends, nobody really to call or to hang out with or to talk about work or any of that stuff. And so there was this overall sense of being disconnected from people. And that was difficult for me. That was a hard aspect of that move, just to step out all by myself and to not have other folks around. That was difficult. And then some of the circumstances started to get challenging too, and to make me even more aware of my isolation and aloneness. So within, a week as I remember, it was about a week after I lived here, right before I was starting work, a group of folks from work got in contact with me, and they had been encouraged to reach out to me because I was new in town, and they were being helpful and friendly and trying to introduce me to people. And they said, "Hey, Chris, you want to go for a bike ride?" And I was like, "Well, I got a bike. I like being active. Sure, I wouldn't mind meeting some people. Let's go for a ride." And so I loaded up the bike on the back of the car. I went and I met these people, and we took off down this little trail. Nothing too crazy right away. And then we got to this part where there was a hill. Now, if you remember, I grew up in Ohio. We had some hills, but not really hills like, here in Western Pennsylvania. It was kind of flat, most of it. I mean, some hills, but nothing significant. So my biking experience on hills was not a lot. Anyway, we got to this hill. At most a half mile into the ride, at most a few minutes we were riding. We got to this hill and I started going down, and my speed was picking up and I was feeling pretty good, and I was like, hey, this isn't so bad. And then partway down the hill there was a little, jump, a little dirt bike jump or something that somebody put in the hill, and I saw it and I thought, okay, just go over that. Well, I went over that and no problem. And I was like, okay, this is kind of fun. I'm managing this hill, and I kept going and speed kept picking up, and I didn't really think, hey, maybe you should slow down. I just kind of let the bike roll, feeling like I was in control. And then to my surprise, another jump was there, another little dirt bike jump, and the first one was fine, so I thought this one will be fine as well. I went over that, and this time I caught some air, like probably at least 6 inches. I mean, I was flying. But as I was in the air, I didn't really know how to handle that. I hadn't really jumped bikes before. I didn't really know what you needed to do, and I just was going down the hill, and all of a sudden I was in the air. And as I was in the air, I kind of let my weight go forward. I didn't keep it back over the back of the bike. I kind of let it go forward. And so what happened was my front wheel hit first, and it hit pretty hard. And then instead of my rear wheel coming down and me landing and traveling on, I went over top the front, over the handlebars, over the whole deal. Gone down on the side of this hill with my bike, a little bit twisted up. I laid there for just a second and I thought, ow, that kind of hurt. And I also thought, man, what a way to meet people, you wipe out within a first half mile of a ride. Hey, how you doing? Not the first impression I was looking for, but I thought, okay, no big deal. I'll get up, straighten out the bike, I'll get back on, we'll ride, it'll be fun, it'll be fine. I got up, started straightening out the bike, and as I was doing it, I thought, I'm kind of sore. Like I'm hurting here. Maybe I should check things out. And I looked at my helmet, and there was a big crack in it, and I thought, good thing I wore a helmet, since that would have been my head. And then I was looking sort of over in this shoulder region, this collarbone, and I noticed that this part out here would move separately of this part in here. And I thought, that's not really how that was before. One piece was sticking up above the other, and you could move them separate of each other. I broke the thing. And so I had to do, a walk of shame out of the woods, while another guy who was apparently pretty good at biking biked his bike out while, moving my bike out with his other hand. Not the beginning that I was hoping for this new life. I was lonely, I was alone, and now I was broken with not really insurance, except for my dad made sure it kicked in. I'm thankful to him for that. And nobody to rely on, nobody to bring me, some hot chocolate or something to make me feel better. Just broken, alone, starting this new life. And some things got a little better as the weeks went on, but some things continued to be challenging. I had this habit where I would check my mail on the way out of the apartment and then get it on the way in. I would just see what I had, put it back in the box, go out, come back in and get it. Well, I started to notice that my mail was missing, that somebody was stealing it. So even if it was like a postcard or a bill or some kind of letter, these things were missing when I returned. Somebody was taking my mail, and that didn't make me feel that awesome. And then the one night I saw some guy trying to get into my car, checking all the doors and locks, and that didn't make me feel that awesome. And then a little bit into this new life, I think I was a couple months in. I'd lived by myself a couple months. I came home from work and I noticed my apartment was broken into. and they took stuff. And they didn't take everything, and they didn't trash the place. They were fairly respectful as far as that goes. But they took stuff that was mine. Money and things that, I wanted to have. And it was just another little blow, another little bump, another little indication to me that maybe this choice was going to prove to be more difficult than I bargained for. Maybe this life that I was trying to live was going to have some more obstacles than I knew at the start. And I had to kind of wonder, well, what now? Do these hardships and difficulties mean that I should get out of Dodge, should try something different? Or do I press on and continue through? And that's the thing. We don't always know that right away. We don't always know how to read difficulties or even successes. If we make a choice and we succeed right away, that could mean that we're on the right road, or it could mean that we're not. We're significantly insignificant in our ability to choose and know the implications of those choices. Also in our ability to sort of read how life is going and what some of these things mean in terms of how we should proceed. Today in our passage of scripture, we're going to hear the account, and we're going to hear a story of two ladies who were met with very similar life circumstance and who chose two different paths. And we're going to look at their story and allow that to speak to us and how we might proceed when life gets challenging and when our choices lead to things that might be difficult or hard. Our passage today comes from Ruth. We'll be in chapter 1, verses 1 all the way through 22. So the whole first chapter, we're going to look at Ruth together, and we're going to hear the story of some choices of faith and what that looked like in terms of the outcomes that were to follow. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. I'm not promising I have any of those pronunciations correctly. Maybe should have looked into that before I started reading them to you. But here's what I want for us to know, a little bit of the context. The nation of Israel was in this season of the judges, we're told. So this is after Joshua. Joshua had led the Israelites into the promised land. They had taken over the bulk of what they were to take over and to occupy. Joshua had passed away, and it's before Israel had a king. So this was before Saul or David or Solomon or any of those people. This season of judges. And during this season, Israel would kind of ebb and flow a bit in terms of their relationship with God. Sometimes they would be close to the Lord, sometimes they would be far away. Sometimes they would worship well, and sometimes they would choose not to. And in the midst of this, God would have judges rise up to bring about some order, some semblance, some structure, and some direction from God. And so they're in this period, they're in the promised land, but sometimes they're closer, sometimes they're further. Sometimes God brings things like famine to adjust the nation's attitude, the people's attitude, and sometimes there are seasons of plenty. Into this time, we hear about this family, a wife, her husband, and their 2 sons, who move from Israel in the land of Judah because of a famine, and they go to Moab. Now, Moab was east of Israel, east of the promised land, and the Moabites were actually related to the Israelites. They were descendants of Lot. So all the way back with Abraham and Lot, the Moabites came down from them. And so this wasn't necessarily a story of this family running away from God or anything like that. It was just them responding to what was happening at that time. And these people were relatives, but really distant relatives. So not the Israelites, they were actually a separate nation, but still related through Lot. Verse 3, now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So this is when the difficulties start to come. It seems like fairly shortly after Naomi and her husband lived there. We're not given a specific timeline, but her husband died. And then her sons got married to Moabite women. And after 10 years of marriage, at least that's the way the scripture reads, so it could be a little less than that, perhaps. But after about 10 years of marriage, both of her sons die. Now, think about that if you were in the position of Ruth or Orpah, these Moabite women. You decide to marry some guys who had come from another nation, who spoke about this God of Israel. You decided to enter into their story and were taken up in marriage through whatever arrangements were made for you. And you lived in this family, part of these people who were amongst your own for 10 years. And during that time, no children. You were barren. The promises of marriage, at least at that time, also had an expectation of having children, of having a future, of having security going forward, that there would be somebody else to provide for you as you entered into old age, that your name and your legacy would carry on. And so part of marriage was the expectation that children would come. And for 10 years, none had came. This was a bad start. It was a bad start not only for Naomi and her family, but it was a bad start for Ruth and for Orpah. The signs were not pointing in a favorable direction. Life was difficult for them. When she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." When she kissed them, and they wept aloud, and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me." I want you to notice a couple things here. One, the scripture repeats a couple of times that these were Ruth's daughters-in-law, and yet when these were Naomi's daughters-in-law, and yet when Naomi talks to them, she refers to them as her daughters. These women had been welcomed into this family, and Naomi was asking for the Lord to bless them as they went a separate way. She said, "You've been faithful, even when it's been hard. You have been loving to me and to my dead sons, and you've been respecting and honoring their memory. You have been faithful, and I wish for the Lord to bless you as you go now your own way. This road is difficult. You can't continue to choose this path. And then she says, even the Lord's hand has gone out against me. Times are tough, and I'm going back to Israel, and I don't want for you to come. There was obviously a caring and loving nature that Naomi had towards these two women who had married her sons, and she wanted to bless them and ensure that they had a future with another husband. At this, they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. Naomi had said to her two daughters-in-law, look at all these signs. Look at all this difficulty and hardship that has faced you. There's nothing but that ahead. Turn and go. And Orpah looked at that, and after some protest, after some wanting to continue with Naomi, said, okay, I'll go along my way. But Ruth had a different reaction. She said, even if the road gets tougher, and even if it means my death, I'm going with you. And more importantly, she said, I'm going with God. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Ruth chose to continue in a life of faith in spite of the difficulties and hardships that were around her. She chose to stick with Naomi, even if that meant her death and more troubles to come. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Naomi was at such a place in her life that she even wanted her name to be changed to represent the bitterness that she felt against God. And Ruth heard and saw all of these things, and yet remained in her commitment to follow God faithfully, whatever that might look like, whatever hardship she might face, whatever obstacle might be in her path. Ruth continued to choose to follow God. An interesting side point here, Naomi left during a time of famine with her husband and sons. She came back during a time of harvest without her husband and sons. And she said that in the time of famine, she was full. In the time of harvest, she was empty. And in part, that's because, we get filled up not by our belly, but by other things in life. And so that's just a little side point that I find to be interesting. But more to the point for today, Ruth continued to choose God in spite of whatever obstacles she faced, even though the journey started off very, very difficult. I mean, I wrecked a bike and I had some stuff stolen. She was married for 10 years without kids, lost her husband, her brother-in-law, her father-in-law had died, and she accompanied a woman who said the Lord was against her and that she even wanted her name to be changed to mean bitter. Ruth chose to walk in faith, recognizing that she didn't need to know all of the reasons of hardship, but that God was going to be her God, no matter the consequence or the outcome. A significantly insignificant person, a woman from Moab who just happened to marry a guy from Judah who will end up being used in a significant way, which we'll look at that more next week. But friends, for you and I, for today, understand that bumps in the road and challenges and obstacles sometimes mean you're on the wrong path. Sometimes it means you're on the right path. And the question is, will you continue in faith? Fortunately for me, when I ran through those obstacles and felt that aloneness and didn't have much place to turn, it pushed me towards God. And my relationship with the Lord grew tremendously in that time. And I hope that the same thing happens for us when we're met with challenges and obstacles, whether we continue forward or turn around or go around them or whatever that looks like, that they push us towards God. That we will learn from this Moabite woman named Ruth to say that God will be my God, no matter what may come. Even if it means death, I will continue to walk a life of faith, because that's where my hope and my life is built. That's where my acceptance and my identity is found. That's the only place where I can live a life of significance and purpose. Otherwise, I'll just be tossed all around like a ship bouncing about in the middle of the ocean with no stern or rudder ability to go forward. We need to continue in faith, whatever direction that is, when life gives us difficulties, trusting that God is good and that He will use even those hardships for our good if we continue to seek the Lord and trust in Him. Friend, may we do that, no matter the choices that we make. May they be choices of faith. And when the road gets difficult, may we continue along that path of faith first and foremost, and everything else will come along behind. For God's sake, for His glory. Amen.